Good afternoon to all esteemed church leaders and all healthcare leaders. My name is Vijit Sangma, and I am your host for today's session, The Wounded Healer, Church as Community of Wholeness. Today, we are moving beyond traditional healthcare discussion to address a silent crisis, trauma, and mental health. We are here to cultivate a new imagination for how the church cares for the broken, recognizing that our faith must address the mind and emotions as deeply as it addresses the soul. And just few announcements, housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphones muted. We encourage you to share your reflections and questions in the chat as we explore this sensitive and vital topic. To open this session, I would like to invite Dr. Ronald Lalton Moyer, General Secretary of CMAI, to share his welcome address on the importance of this session. Over to you, Dr. Ron.
Thank you, Abhijit, and a warm greetings to all the participants for this webinar this afternoon. A very appropriate and important topic on the church's pastoral role for the trauma and mental health, a new imagination for Christian care, and the wounded healer, church as a community of wholeness. And today we have our CMA president, Dr. Santhosh Mathew, who will be taking us through this session. Mental health is a very important aspect of our new strategy from in CMAI from this year onwards as we take it forward. We have already initiated a, a comprehensive community-based mental health initiative with some of our member institutions. 14 of the member institutions across the country has been part of the training, the initial training. And now we're in the phase that we implement what we have been trained. This was in association with Health Sochi Academy, and we will take it forward in the upcoming strategy on the mental health. My own personal experience I want to share because during the COVID time, I was in Thailand. I was stuck in Chiang Mai, no international flight. We cannot move anywhere, and it was very difficult staying alone. No one around. Few of our colleagues were there in the same building, but we cannot even meet each other. And those during those times, we went through such a all of us did such our mental health was shaken to beyond our understanding. And at the time, it was the role of, and it was the church who started the online services where I started attending, and it was such an enlightening moment for me. It helped me go through those traumatic time. It helped me go through all those mental distress. It helped me go through all the difficulties that being alone in a different country, all on your own, that was the role of the church, how it played to me. And I experienced that myself. And I understand how much important mental health should be addressed by the church and the Christian, especially our healthcare services. So today, as we look into this, as we learn more about it, I hope that we can take this into our practice and ensure that we have a healthy community. We are talking about a holistic, a wholeness, fullness of life, a wholeness of life. And that one very important aspect for our own is our mental health. So I wish all the participants a good time of learning and interaction this afternoon. And I especially thank Dr. Santosh for accepting to take this session, and Dr. Abhijit for organizing this webinar, and and the regional coordinator, Reverend Sumit David, for all the communication and organizing this webinar this afternoon. Uh, we will we will definitely take mental health as a very important focus area of CMAI in the future as well, not only within the institution, but even within the community, and especially the church community. So I wish everyone a good time of learning, a good time of interaction, and may our learning makes us be the instrument of healing in wholeness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ronald, for highlighting that the holistic ministry must include the healing of the mind and for being vulnerable and sharing what you have gone through during COVID time. It's a privilege to introduce Dr. Santhosh Mathew. Dr. Santhosh is currently the president of CMAI, and also he is training coordinator with International Christian Medical and Dental Association, ICMD, which brings fellowship like ours from all over the world. About more than 120 countries are part of it. And he takes care of all the training needs of different countries and of the medical and dental graduates and students. Apart from that, he has also pioneered his work in HIV/AIDS, and he is an internal medicine specialist. And he has also led the Emmanuel Hospital Association in the past. Today, he will guide us through this journey of revisiting our past, where the church was the primary source of care. And it will help us in recognizing the modern theological shift we must take to address trauma today. Santosh, we look forward to your insight on the wounded healer.
Thank you, Abhijit and Ron and Sumit. Let me start with the caveat. I am not an expert in this, and as I was looking at the participants, I see psychiatrists, counselors, senior pastors, and trainers of pastors even, who are there. I think some of them are much more experienced in this field than I am. But then let me tell you why I took it up. The only reason was Abdid asked me. One of the reasons, a few months back, the Evangelical Fellowship of India, the All India Congress on Missions, they do it every 10 years, had a session on webinar on mental health. And for some reason, they asked me. And I presented some thoughts there, and Abhijit overheard it and said, "Okay, sir, you have to do it." So I couldn't say no to him. But then, so I would hope that we have about 1.5 hours plus. I would hope that this would be a time of interactive learning. Others can contribute later after my presentation so that we can learn together. Uh, from my early career times itself, I worked mostly in mission hospitals and HIV and leadership. And one of the things I was interested in was mental health, mainly because there were no psychiatrists. A physician of past ages are, counselor come psychiatrist come dermatologist come all into one, because we never had psychiatrists. So I had a lot of interest professionally, and I've taken care of patients. I mean, that's about for 2 decades. But somewhere in that journey, a few years back, it turned around. I myself went through a season. It is not COVID, pre-COVID, and that actually changed the whole perspective of what mental health is. Now, I have started realizing unless you go through it, you don't really understand. So there is another reason why whenever somebody talk about it, I offer myself, because I feel this is something we need to talk about. So let me straight away I'll talk more about the experiences later, because there's a group of people whom I'm journeying with to understand what they're going through, what each of us are going through. So I'll talk about it later. But then let me get into this presentation straight. Please feel free to put questions, reflections, and if you want any of this data information, it's all freely available. This presentation was made a few months back, and I tried to look for new data. I couldn't get anything because the data, the national data are still not there. So I look at three broad perspectives. One is to look at our past, our legacy as a healing community, and what is the context of the world around us, and how do you reimagine or renew or look at our possibilities. Now let me go back and say we are talking about church. Now at the outset, I'm not talking about the ecclesiastic structural church that is always there. I'm talking about a community of faith, because no, the moment you talk about church, our mind goes to, okay, the bishop, the moderator, the thing, or the pastor and his elders. Of course they are important, but I think I want to kind of look at the whole church as a community of faith which is journeying together than the structural uh, church. It is important that all the churches have a role to play, but my perspective is from a limited perspective. The first section is to look at our legacy. As I was preparing that time, I came across this passage. It's very interesting how Jesus saw, it's in Mark 9 to 36, saw the crowds, he has compassion on them. I worked for about 8 or 9 years in Duncan Hospital, Rexall. And as some of you have visited there, you will know, as you walk into the OPD, there's a huge crowd of people waiting. Our OPD number is about 400. With two people coming along, there were 1,500 people milling around in that courtyard. And normally, when I see the crowd, I get irritated because, for me, it was work to be finished. And I was asking myself, what happened to Jesus when he saw the crowd? What moved in him? And the words used here are that he recognized that they were harassed, wearied, and distressed. Another translation says cast down, scattered, and helpless. Now, I'm again not a Greek or Hebrew expert, but the word actually root is something which now we are using for anxiety and mental health, anxiety and depression. Cast down, helpless, distressed, wearied, the ability to see what others don't see. That was the legacy of our master. I think I want to start our conversation with this as a foundation. Jesus left us a legacy of being able to see what others ignore or were unable to see. Now, the healing ministry of the church did not start yesterday. It started with Jesus. Of course, the first century church continued to have miracles and wonders and miracles and all healing happening, but a structured response came historically from the historical evidence was during the plague of Cyprian in 250 AD. Most of this documentation is from church leaders. It is the Pontius of Carthage and Cyprian, the bishop of Carthage, who has actually described the clinical features and eyewitness account. You know why? There was a medical school at that time. Galen, with its disciples, were head of the medical system there. They all ran away. In the middle of this, when there were 5,000 lives being lost in Rome, the persecuted minority, the church, was at the forefront of caring. Interestingly, when professionals were not willing to take responsibility, the church stepped in. Now, there were no Christian professionals, but there were secular professionals at that point of time. And when professionals were not willing, the church stepped in. Interestingly, Rodney Stark, he's a historian, not a Christian. In the book Rise of Christianity, he says, heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to that every need and ministering to them in Christ. With them, they also got the illness and departed from this life serenely happy. But I want to look at the last statement which he makes. What went on during the epidemics was only an intensification of what went on every day among Christians. I think that was something we need to hold on. We responded very well during the pandemic. I totally agree with Ronald. Many of us went through struggles. The churches really reached out. But then what Rodney Stark says is that what went during the epidemics was only an intensification of what went on every day among the Christians, which means the church was a community of caring. Of course, there may not have been understanding of mental health. We'll come to that later. But the challenges which the community was facing at that point of time. Then the transition happened. The first hospital again was started by a bishop. Basil, Bishop of Caesarea, started the first modern hospital. It is called as hospice because it is a house of hospitality. It is not a healthcare center. It is a house of hospitality. That's what now the corporate hospitals have learned from. The hospitality is more important than healthcare. You create all the 5-star facilities, people will come to you. But that was how it was started. But over the next few centuries, with the professionalization of care, the enlightenment, the scientific revolution, healthcare became totally professionalized, medicalized, as we know. It is important because I think that was a great growth in terms of understanding the various nuances of infections and non-communicable diseases based on the knowledge which God gave. But then that also led to a few changes. The care becomes subcontracted to trained professionals. Medicine became mystified. because the common man could not understand. Many times when I talk to my friends, I teach young doctors. Recently I was talking to a junior doctor. He said, "Sir, patient came with a stroke." I said, "You are not a non-medical. You're a medical person. Don't speak common language. Speak medical language, because we will call it cerebrovascular accident. We have the ability to mystify medicine because that is part of science." There was that mystification. And in that journey, the holistic understanding of health and human body was lost. And medicine became more and more became with a biomedical understanding. If you look at the last 2 or 3 decades, uh, with the growth of the Protestant movements, the various evangelical and church planting movements, various movements which came during the last 3 or 4 decades. More and more, there is that divide between body versus soul, body as a machine that needs to be repaired and sorted out, soul that needs to be saved. So much so that there are, the understanding is that body is only healthcare or healing is primarily entry point for saving the soul. Or the other side, brokenness and weakness as a strength. The minority community which was persecuted was caring for others. That was their strength, because in that weakness, they were caring because they knew God was with them. We have moved to a triumphalistic and a very narrow perspective. More and more, we have moved also from intellectual community to a feeling community. It was Rene Descartes who said, "We think, therefore we are." But if you, the current context is, we feel, therefore we are. We look at the gender, various issues. It's because what I feel is what I am. And along with that came the emotional Christianity. If you feel down and depressed, the problem is the spirit. It is not mental, it is spiritual. And we landed up in a situation where we have disintegrated the human body without realizing that there is a complexity of human struggles. And we as a community need to discern where we can engage, how we can support the whole human as a whole. Interestingly, early in 20th century, Martin Lloyd-Jones recognized this. Martin Lloyd-Jones was a well-known preacher, come doctor who turned to be a preacher. He was the pastor of the Westminster Abbey, the physician to the Queen. He was the first person early in his who started actually in the current generation, started teaching on this to the churches and doctors. I've heard this audio recordings. If anybody is interested, you can contact me. I'll send you the audio recordings. How he taught a group of doctors, saying that, "Hey, you also need to understand." He would use the same thing to teach pastors. Said that it's very important to understand that a human can be affected by physical problems, spiritual problems, mental illness, and even demon oppression. And he gave categories and said, "These are the features. This is how you should address." But remembering that man is a whole being. Now, so it is not lack of resources. There is enough teaching in our Protestant church about looking at this from a very clear theological framework. Though you can't box it separately into each, but there are tools and techniques which people have used, but somewhere we lost it. So what does this mean to us? I think we need to return to that holistic understanding of integrated body, mind, spirit, and discern how we as a community of faith can respond to it. So what I wanted to leave up here was the legacy we are part of. This is the legacy we are part of. Jesus, who role model, the first century church who role model, the early church who role model this, and even senior spiritual leaders who started talking about it and teaching people even as recent as 19th and 20th century. Let me go on to the world around us. What is the context of the world today? I'm just putting up some definitions which are basically mental health is a state of well-being, so that the regular stresses of life, in the middle of that, they can function well. Mental well-being. A disorder is when those affect our emotions, our behaviors, which causes distress and disrupt our ability to function. Now, every feeling down is not mental illness. Okay, mental illness is that which leads to disruption of the ability to function in the various environments and relationships we have. So it could be a few, a feeling of down on one end of the spectrum to a severe mental illness the other end of the spectrum. So when you use mental illness, it's a broad term. But so this want to that just highlighting some numbers. Again, remember, behind every number, every statistics we say here, there are traumatized, hurting, and disoriented people who've been torn apart inwardly and sometimes distanced socially from their families and communities. Out externally, they might be doing well. Internally, they may be cringing inside. It says that 1 in 5 adults are affected. We have 150 plus 140 plus people here, which means that how many might be affected here? I don't want an altar call here, but to say that if there are 100 people affected, there will be 100 people here, 20 people may have had mental illness. That is the numbers we're talking about. Look at the children numbers. This has become the leading cause of disability worldwide. And severe mental illness, life expectancy reduced by almost 2 decades. As of end of 2025, they say that over 1 billion people are living with mental illness. So it's a widespread problem. It's an untreated issue. 70% of acute severe mental illness do not access services, and a very under-resourced issue. And the prevalence is at all ages. Look at this graph. You see that from teen onwards till 80s and 90s, it's across. I've been privileged in the last year or so to be back in a home state, and moving into many families around and realize there's a huge number of elderly who are lonely, who are depressed, because with the increasing age. So no age is protective. End of 2024, an excellent book came out called The Anxious Generation. If you can get this book, it is worth reading it. It's a little old, and also from a Western perspective, though there are some global data in it. What the Jonathan Haidt did was they did almost 25,000 interviews, both from West and Southern continent, Northern continent and Southern continent, predominantly from the Northern continent, but there are numbers from Southern continent also, and looked at younger generation and mental illness. And they said that there has been a rapid increase in teens with major depression from 2014 onwards. And girls more than boys. And we also showed that this increase is the most of the thing is anxiety and depression. The blue is the anxiety, the other is the depression. Major illness are much less. And then they looked at social class and found that those who are socially on the lower socioeconomic status are more vulnerable. Not that the well-off are not, but that 22 more than 200 is the vulnerability index. And then he went back and looked at a correlation. What happened between 2004 to 14? Very interestingly, the numbers started going up in 2004. It peaked in 2014-15. Two things changed. The smartphone came in 2004. The social media came in 2014. By 2010, the smartphones were all over the place. Social media boom came in 14. And he started correlating this and looked at this and said, there is definitely a correlation between the connection, the disconnected generation. No different in India. They did a study in India and realized in schools, in the teenage, Asian students also are feeling alienated. National Mental Health Survey last was done in 2015-16, 25-26 is going on. At that time, there was 10% of general population being affected mostly with depression and anxiety. We don't know what the new data will show because post-COVID there's been a major increase. Interestingly, independent groups have done lots of studies. Look at the graph on the left side. 30% of Indian population are still having mental distress 3 years after the lockdown. So it's not lockdown alone. Lockdown 3 years down, that is about 2024, we are having 30% of Indian population. And who are the 30%? Look at this graph. Majority are the Gen Z or the 18 to 24 years. The next is the millennials. And of that, the females have much higher. Young women have much higher. These are data from large number of studies in India. And they all, some of them also did a study with young people, and these young people very clearly said, I go to a hospital, the hospitals are only bothered about physical health. The healthcare system does not care about our mental health. And 60% said they are stressed to the point they can are impacted on their life, regular life. And people are turning around and saying mental health and physical health are equally important. This is not professional, these are not, I don't know whether the pastors in this, but general population. And again, if you look at the graph here, 46% of the responses who said that it's affecting your life were Gen Z women. Well, around the same time, WHO came out with the loneliness epidemic report, 2025, middle 2025, June, and looked at how there is a huge loneliness epidemic in the world. The global prevalence is almost 20 to 25%. More in the adolescent and older generation is not less. And if you look at the countries or regions, low middle income countries and low income countries have more than high income countries, which means our country, look at the numbers we may have in India. Again, studies from schools in India show that there are multiple factors. Of course, there are academic pressures, there are environmental stresses, there are genetic factors, family dynamics. But one important issue they highlighted was childhood trauma and digital stresses. I know there is lots of discussions on trauma, but how many of our attending church members might be struggling with trauma from the past? We only see the evidence of increasing divorce, increasing drug abuse, alcohol use, and addictions. Look at South India, Kerala, Northeast, Northwest, Northern India. We don't have data, but the drug addiction is drastically increasing. Why? That's the question to ask. I just want to share data from one of the colleges which a friend shared with me. Don't worry, it is none of our colleges. They did a study with the third years of a professional course to understand why the students are struggling. 60% of third years were clinically depressed. It's a professional college. Unable to cope with pressures of studies, exhaustion, poor coping skills, parental expectations, poor time management, and also said that the professors don't understand us. They don't know our generation, how we process information. I want to leave with a few more additional thoughts. Have you come across narcissistic, controlling, insecure, sometimes self-serving, megalomaniac leaders within our own communities? Those are external signs of an internal mental health issue. Generally, especially men, show a good face or a strong face, or a megalomaniac, a strong face externally, but deep inside they may be struggling. What about pastors and ministers trying to prove their worth? The Messiah syndrome. I am indispensable. Or, oh no, I have sacrificed so much for God, driven by work. How many families have been destroyed? You can ask it. Our journey in EHA in Bihar had taken us through a lot of opportunities to interact with the church planning missionaries in Jharkhand and Bihar. And it was Many times they used to come for treatment to us, and it's many times very traumatic to listen to their stories. Many of them were struggling really, but they would never talk about it because they were there sacrificing their life for the gospel. Why are people attracted to this huge performance-driven, emotionally moving worship and health and wellness theology or the mega churches? Because emotions are catered to, and there is an emotional struggle they go through. Is that enough for them? That's the whole question to ask. The question we leave here is, are we like ostriches who put our head under the carpet and say, hey, this is not, I can't do much about it, this will also go? Or are we like the meerkat, fearful, I don't know what to do? Or will we be a listening, reflective, and discerning community who look at and say, yes, we can do something about it? This is an animal in South America which is called fossa. It is said that it is a very always alert, looking around at what are the opportunities. That is the picture we need to hold on as a community. And the science is already saying this. The now definite evidence is emerging from scientific articles saying that something called internal spirituality can do very well for mental health. We knew it much earlier. So this is from an article which said that internal spirituality is good for mental well-being. We should be the people who are talking about it. What does this mean to us? It means this is an opportunity to regain lost ground. Let me go to the last section of this presentation and this thing. So what does all this mean to us as a community of faith? I want to look at 5 aspects of it. The importance of revisiting our theology and understanding, straying from labeling, diagnosing, and spiritualizing issues, creating a culture of vulnerability, community as an potential way, and other systems of support. Now, it's very interesting that many of the Protestant leaders whom we look up to struggled from mental health issues. Spurgeon, in his book, he wrote a book called The Minister's Fainting Fits to all his young pastor trainees. And he wrote in this saying that fits of depression come over most of us. Usually cheerful as we may be, we must at intervals be cast down. The strong are not always vigorous. The wise are not always ready. The brave are not always courageous. And the joyous are not always happy. And he goes on to talk about, remember that as ministers, each of us can go through it. Interestingly, if you look at the history, Martin Lloyd-Jones, Martin Luther, William Wilberforce, John Bunyan, David Bernard, William Cowper, all of them struggled with mental illness. And they've talked about it openly. Spurgeon went on to say, I am writing it so that it might be consolatory to some of my brothers, that if I give my thoughts on this matter, I have chosen to do this so that younger men might not fancy that some strange thing that happened to them. He was telling the young pastors that, this is part of our journey and life. And he writes about Luther. I want to read it out to you. The life of Luther might be sufficient to give us 1,000 instances, and he was no means of the weaker sort. His great spirit was often the 7th heaven of exaltation, but as frequently on the borders of despair. His very deathbed was not free from tempest. He sobbed himself into his last sleep like a greatly wearied child. Instead of multiplying cases, let's dwell upon the reasons why these things are permitted. Why is that children of light somehow walk in thick darkness? Why heralds of daybreak find themselves at times of tenfold night? Luther, we consider ourselves Luther as the founder of the Protestant movement. He struggled with it. Stanley Jones, interestingly, in his life story, he writes this. My body did not throw off diseases as before, and I began to have nervous collapses. As a consequence, at the end of 8.5 years, I was ordered to go to America on furlough. And in that section, he goes on to say, I knew I was called for a purpose. But when I looked at my resources, there was question marks bordering on dismay. And he concludes that section saying that I knew the game was up. I would have to leave this mission field and try to work to regain my shattered health. What was his response? He came back and started Noor Manchil in Lucknow. He writes in the foundational document, there used to be a time when we would hand over the body to a doctor and mind to psychiatrist and soul to the minister. Instead, they are all bound together. When the mind is ill, the illness can be passed to the body. The illness of the body can affect the mind as well. Spiritual unrest can impact both body and mind. Human beings are not units, not pieces. And that is how he started sanatorium in Lucknow. And the purpose statement is it will provide psychiatric treatment and spiritual healing for missionaries and others. But we somehow seem to have lost this. We think mental health will tell us how mind and brain works, and religious traditions, church will tell us what it all means, what mind means. And each of this don't talk to each other, how to deal with the concerns of each other. We doctors and mental health professionals will look at from a biomedical perspective, and the other looks from a spiritual perspective, and each continues in a bubble. But this interesting article, they talk about saying that we are integral spiritual psychosomatic unity created for relationship, and church has to have a mission that holds it together. I found this picture very interesting. This is from a book called The Gospel Shaped Frameworks for Health and Healing. Humans have the physical aspect of our health, the emotional aspect of our health, the relational aspect of our health, the spiritual aspect of our health, and the ultimate God-given purpose. We need to hold this together. So revisit our understanding. Second, do not, overdiagnose or refrain from labeling. Neither spiritual nor medical. As I told you, I went through a season of challenge, and I'll talk about it later. But I've been journeying with a few men, very senior people in their 70s and 60s, who've got, and many of them say that the moment they talk, that one of them is a church leader, a couple of them are church leaders, is that if I tell it to the church leader, my colleague, they'll say, you're spiritually, backsliding, and label that you're a backslider. I remember conversing to a common friend about that person. He said, no. His problem is that he is not spiritually strong. He is using his label to get away from work. Or, so do not diagnose. Don't call people bipolar. No, he is bipolar. Is he bipolar? Do you call somebody diabetes? Don't. But don't use terminologies which will label people. At the same time, very important to talk from scriptures. But remember, sometimes scriptures don't go in when a person is going through mental challenges. A casual use of scriptures is not no. Sometimes silent journey is more important. Remember Job and his friends? The first week was the best when they sat silently. But then after they opened his mouth, they made the whole story complex. Of course, speaking truth through the scriptures are important, but be sensitive. We'll pray for healing, but again, don't overdo the prayer of healing. Remember, be sensitive that this person may not be able to receive it, because many of them may stop going to church, feel abandoned by God, may even abandon prayer. I have a friend of mine who has not gone to church for 5 years. He said, I go there. I want to sit down and quietly worship. I can't, because suddenly everybody says, everybody stand up, clap their hands. I don't feel like doing it. Nobody understands my pain. So better that I stay at home and worship myself, because I can't talk about it to others. These are lived experience of friends. And the third thing we should remember is that create a culture of vulnerability and soul conversations. I remember talking to a young pastor about the season of life I went through. And he turned around and said, Uncle, you have to write it down. I said, I will not. Because my first question was, what will others think? I am here a leader, ex-leader of this organization, that organization. People know me. If I put down that this is what I've gone through, what will people think about me? I want to acknowledge that, all of us struggle with this honor, shame and honor. What will people think about me? It took 6 months. At the end of 6 months, he came back again and said, I'm still waiting. But he, in his sermons, started talking about his own struggles. And that challenged me. And I put down in a magazine an article. But what happened out of that was interesting. Close friends whom I knew for years turned around and said, hey, we also are on treatment. We are getting psychiatric treatment. We don't know whom to talk to. Can we all meet once in a while? And suddenly realize there are many silently suffering who was never talked about. That was a great learning for me. That young pastor was creating a culture where people were open to share their broken journeys. But remember, stigma is real. There's a self-stigma. You're thinking that, you are of no good. You are inferior than others. Of course, you know that if you open this society might, of course, there is the social stigma. Can somebody mute? Pass? And even structures, because having been in organizational leadership and being in multiple organizations, I've heard this again and again. Statements like this: people with mental health cannot hold down a job. We will think twice before appointing them. They're just using that as an excuse for bad behavior. Maybe they have had sin in the past. They're not trying good enough. These statements. So very important to recognize that we need to have leaders who will role model vulnerability. And then, as you role model vulnerability, facilitate communities where souls can be shepherded by speaking truth of the gospel. Remember, none of us are different. Some of us might be struggling with mental illness. Some of us might not be struggling with mental illness. But both can flourish mental health at some point of time. Even those who don't have mental illness can have languishing mental health at some point of time. We are in the same spectrum of journey. There is no us and them. So the presence or absence does not separate us. Those barriers have to be broken and create communities of sharing. And this is a statement from one of the friends whom I know very closely. And he shared, after journeying with this community of men, and he said this: my journey has taught me that truth has been spoken to me, but truth does always mean that you will not limp. Does not mean that you will not limp. You will wait faithfully with a limp. You will dance with a limp. You will be supported as you run with a limp. Maybe I might be healed, but still, truth is important to help me to journey even with a limp throughout my life. And he went on to write that this community is a safe space. The listening and validation of agony is helpful. And it went on to say the ecclesiastical and professional context can be inadequate. A sharing community can become a great support system. So what does that all mean to us? It means that if you need to really address mental health, there need to be, of course, biomedical care. We need to know where psychiatrists need to come in, where psychologists need to come in, where counselors need to come in, where pastoral counseling has to happen, where institutionalized care needs to happen. But that alone doesn't address mental illness. There needs the social wholeness, which means the society at large, the community of faith at large need to accept. There has to be a community of recovery where people can journey openly with others who are struggling. Or at the same time, there's ways of speaking the truth through the word into the hearts of people. So it has to be a framework of response, not, detached medical or spiritual, a combined holistic. Lausanne Congress, which happens every 10 years, in the last Lausanne Congress, they had an excellent paper on mental health and church. And I want, if you're interested, the references here. He said, a church that ignores mental health is irrelevant to the felt needs of its members and mission field. And the Bible frequently reminds of God's heart for those who are alienated and excluded. Today, mental health, people with mental health are feel alienated and excluded. Christian discipleship and emotional and mental health go together. And teaching culture and practices can contribute significantly. And then it goes on to say, what should church do? They should know their role. What can a church do? Church leaders should develop literacy, mental health literacy. Of course, there might be systems of counseling. I know I see pastoral counselors here, pastoral counsel educators here, very senior people. They know about it. They do a lot of work on this. And our addressing of mental health should be holistically. Of course, does our churches have safeguarding systems, processes? And congregation should be taught. And the report goes on to say that churches could perform an yearly mental health audit to see how the leaders are coping. World Council of Churches in 2025, there was an article write-up, and it says that very interesting, from Galatians 2, this writer says, we are mandated for mutual care within and beyond the community, responding to the needs of others in compassion, solidarity, and love, regardless of difference of distance, bearing one another's burdens, and this way we'll fulfill the will of God. This is in the context of mental health. So let me conclude. So what are some things we can take back? If your understanding is not right, try to renew the understanding. What does that mean when you say about mental health? Am I caught in the biomedical or in the spiritual? Or do I see it holistically? In my own area of influence, in my church, in my faith community, how do we see it? What are we doing today? Is there a way of being open and vulnerable, creating communities? Look at our organizational cultures and leadership styles. Are they open, vulnerable? Me as a leader, am I open and vulnerable so that others can feel open to share their struggles? And now vulnerability is not opening up, this is who I am, please accept me as I am. That's not what I'm talking about. Vulnerability is communicating what God is teaching you through the struggles you and I are going through. It's about God, it's not about you. Vulnerability is something which you have already brought to God. And God is teaching you that His ability is enough, His strength is enough. These are the coping mechanisms you are learning. So it's not about, because today we live in the context of a vulnerable leadership. Be open and vulnerable. That's not what you're talking about. It's about what you are learning through this journey. How can we rebuild communities where open communication can happen? And commit to tackle challenges holistically. I love Henry Newman in his books, and he says it's in this act of caring together that you and I possess a great treasure. One of the great riches of caregiving is that it embraces something more simply than a simple focus on cure. Caring carries with an opportunity to inner healing, liberation, and transformation of the one being cared for and the one who cares. Remember, it is transformational for you and me, who are the care providers. So it is not we doing it for somebody else. We journeying with each other so that we can be transformed. And in his book, The Wounded Healer, he says, the main question is not how can we hide our wounds? How can we put our wounds or woundedness in the service of others? That is the call for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Santhosh, for that powerful presentation. You challenged our triumphalistic tendencies. And it's time to stop viewing depression or trauma as a mere spiritual issue and start seeing them through a lens of holistic care. So now we'll move into Q&A, and we have received some of the question during the registration. So I hope some of them have been addressed during the presentation. And we've received some questions here. So I'll take them one by one and request Dr. Santhosh to respond.
Yeah, I'll
So
pick
we,
up some of the questions which have sent to me earlier, and I
sure.
realize that quite a few of those have been addressed. But in some of them, one of the questions asked was that how can we address trauma if we don't first address the divisions which exist within the church, the and hierarchies within the church? Yeah, I mean, we can keep talking about divisions and hierarchies within the church till Christ returns and still struggle with it. It'll only get sorted out only in the new heaven and new earth. Let's face that fact. Because you can't wait for church to sort itself out before we respond to it. But I think this division itself shows how we have the us versus them mentality. Some of us will say we have the full truth, others will have the part truth, and we create all these divisions. I don't have answers to that, and I don't think I'm an expert in that. So I'm just leaving it there and saying that only to say that we can't wait for church to sort itself out before caring for others. Uh, it's a broken vessel. Church is a broken vessel. That broken vessel, within that, we need to find ways of carrying out. Uh, uh, One other question was, how do you differentiate between spiritual issue and organic issue? Was strategy to address both? I found Martin Lloyd Jones' teaching very interesting. There's a full write-up on it. If you're interested, Abhijit can share my number. I can share it. He looks at, this is a training for pastors and later doing it doctors, how medical, psychological, spiritual, demonic should be addressed, and how, as a leader, a church leader, you can look at it. And I haven't, there are lots of books on, write articles on it, and there are ways in which, but you can look at both in terms of frameworks and clinical and, spiritual frameworks. But it is not to box things into box. And I remember working in EHI hospitals and where we were faced many times with demonic possession. And I labeled them as psychiatric and given antipsychotic treatments. And friends who worked there earlier or pastors who have been, they said, we have seen it happening. Can we pray for the patient? I had to be educated because I looked at from and then I remember the early years of my journey, I would never accept that there was a demonic situation. My eyes had to be opened by pastors who have experienced it. Much later, when we started seeing, I always had the struggle. Is it demonic? Is it psychiatric? So it's not easy, but there are frameworks and others we can look at. If you're more interested, we can converse later. There may not be enough time to look at that. There's one question: what is the biblical solution to help patients? How does pastoral medical care without being disturbed? How can pastors care without being disturbance to clinical treatment? Now, I think it is not either or; it's both and. I think I've made it very clear that a human body is not just physical, emotional, body and mind. You are an integrated human being, so you need the care of both spirit and the body, the soul and the mind. So it is not biblical. Uh, uh, Sorry, I know. Pastoral care will not disturb medical care. Medical care should not disturb pastoral care. It's a team this thing. There is one question which came about the oversensitive to trauma and appropriate trauma care. I want to address this in a very clear, some aspects of it not clear, some thoughts here, because we are living in a context where there is a constant focus on past trauma. We need to acknowledge that there is trauma which has contributed to behavior. But there is also an over-drivenness on everything related to our past. We also need to take responsibility for our behavior. Yes, trauma definitely plays a role in the behavior we have. But we live in a culture where we need to find fault with somebody else. Remember, our leaders will talk about the past. As individuals, we are talking about this is how I was dealt with. This is my gene. I blame it on the brain. I blame it on my gene. I blame it on what happened to me. So it's very important to recognize that there might be situations where it's a blame game. At the same time, we need to recognize that trauma definitely plays a role uh, in the way people behave. Uh, there is also another challenge which we are going through, as I said, from logic to feelings. We live in the context of logic, which has moved from logic to physics. So coping abilities are much lesser in the emerging younger generation. So you need to kind of understand these nuances when you look at trauma. There are a lot of questions on how do you manage trauma. I don't think this session is enough to talk about how do you manage trauma. Trauma healing and management itself is a special webinar. Maybe, Abhijit, you should ask our psychiatrist friends and psychologist friends to do a separate webinar. There are lots of tools, there are lots of books, there are a lot of things, and you need professional teams to engage if trauma is significant enough and has been this thing. So I don't think I can respond to that now. Um, the other question is, how can a doctor be more effectively involved in the church and church ministry? Well, I'm asking this myself at this season of my life where I've moved from one context to another context, because church has its hierarchies, its structures, its systems. Uh, I think, making ourselves available and putting whatever talents God has given us in for people. And I also understand church is not the structure. Church is a community. So that's why I started off with that understanding that it is a community of faith with which we need to journey with. The structures may allow, may not allow, but nobody prevents us from journeying with people in the church or communities of faith. Um, uh, there was a question on how can church do without compromising on its focus, at the same time overstepping um, its mandate. Uh, as I said, the whole question is about, can we facilitate caring communities? And if you're caring communities, within the caring community, you need to think through what can be done in a non-professional setup, what can be done by professionals, what can be done by doctors, what can be done by different groups of people. It is not to say that this is, but to recognize that a caring community is more important than saying that you do this, that I do this. But people who are going through the struggle need people to journey with, community journey with. One Gen Z person has written, please talk about a young Gen Z generation. We are expecting more challenges. How can we be prepared? I totally agree. My own journey with young generation is that they're really struggling. Does our engagement recognize this? Does our teaching in the church or engagement even in medical colleges and medical schools address this? Or in our teaching, in our engagements with the youth, address this? This is a question to ask. Because that study which I showed from from a professional college, the person who did the study said, what was said is that the senior professors and the teachers don't understand us. They are not open to listen to us. They only teach us. Now, if that step is not taken, I think there would be uh, a challenge. So how do you, recognize that the younger generation is going to face it more, and how can we, look at our responses? There's a question about how can mission healthcare remain relevant as corporatization of healthcare rises rapidly. That is not a question for this forum, but mental health is a huge area which we can enter in and engage with. And I asked about what changes need to be made for people to feel free and open. Listen, open your ears, open your hearts, be vulnerable, willing to journey. And another question is about whom can we identify to journey with us? Very challenging. But look for people who are trustworthy, who will keep confidentiality, who will be non-judgmental. And somebody is asking about mental health of pastors. Very important. Are there systems for caring for pastors or leaders that way? People in leadership. Yeah, so these are questions which had come earlier. Abhijit, are there questions in the chat also? Yeah, we're still in the same culture. Many of them do not want to accept their mental illness problem, do not share it. How do you bring awareness and know them? Okay. Very true. Many, and let me be very frank here, and I'm not putting down a fraternity. My own engagement in the last 2 decades, that the most difficult groups have been doctors and pastors. I don't know why. There are pastors who are struggling, there are doctors who are struggling, but they would not want to talk to anybody else. So this shame and honor culture is something like deeply embedded into our lives. How do you do it? I only have one answer. Only you and I can role model this. Be open, vulnerable, and create, and talk about it. That find our identity in Christ, not in what others think about me. We need to come back to that basic teaching on your identity is based in Christ. You are not yours. You are not others. Others' perception do not own you. Christ owns you. That does not change by anything. So foundational teachings we have to keep reminding each other. How do you approach a person who has a mental problem? Only a normal Christian does not know how to believe he's still okay.
Let me read it out.
Yeah.
How do you approach a person who you know has a mental problem unmanifested, and it's only a nominal Christian and does not know it and believes he is still okay? He does not want to be confronted either.
Yeah. So whether nominal Christian or Christian doesn't make any difference. He has a mental illness. It's unmanifested. That's the issue. See, if you don't have, in the severe mental illness, I don't know whether you're talking about a mild mental illness or a major illness. In challenge, when you don't have insight, is very difficult. If a person does not have insight, it will be very difficult to take a person for treatment. Because if you believe that I believe that I'm normal, though I have a problem, I'm okay, though I have a problem, I will not be willing for treatment. And if it's a major illness, the community or the church, the family has to come around. Whether it's a Christian or not Christian doesn't make a difference. It has to be treated like any other illness. Here is a medical problem, a psychiatric problem, or mental illness. Should it be treated or not? The patient has insight, no insight. So is it significant enough to need warrant treatment? If so, the family has to take the responsibility. If it is not significant enough, wait and watch. How do you overcome stress, tension, and depression from church perspective? Yeah, the question. Yeah, so that's what I talked about, this mental illness spectrum. Stress, tension, and depression, mild, feeling of down and depression is not mental illness. When it affects your, daily function and your relationships and you're unable to this thing, that is where it goes in the spectrum of mental illness. And there are toolkits which you can use to diagnose. But then there are spiritual. What did David do? Why are you downcast, O my soul? David constantly, speaks to his own soul. So three things David does is David goes into the church, into the temple. He talks to his soul, and you don't find he talking to friends, but a community can be a great journey. Where you can journey with others who can help you to journey in that journey of stress, tension, and other challenges. Don't try to manage it yourself. We have spiritual resources, we have relational resources, we have family resources. Use it. Nobody can journey alone in this world. Autism is a mental illness. How do you approach it? But I think who manifests. Yeah. So when it comes to autism and other major uh, disorders or this thing, they need professional help. I am not uh, experienced enough to talk about it, and there will be trauma if it is unaddressed. So again, in that spectrum of care, you have the lower quadrant where professional help, institutional help, psychiatrist help need to be taken. Psychologists, those is to be here. So to recognize which one needs that and everything.
The next one is how to identify some common warning signs of burnout, depression, anxiety, or emotional exhaustion in pastors that are often ignored. And how can churches create safe environments where pastors feel free, they can be honest without fear of judgment or losing respect?
Yeah, so the how can you identify? There's enough checklists now available. Mental health has become a area where everywhere you go and Google it, you'll get enough toolkits to check yourself. You want to check whether you're depressed, you're anxious, you're bipolar, you're anything you can do. There are enough even Christian leadership toolkits are available where you can do self check and say, are you sick? But then more than all this, I believe a peer journey, a mentoring journey, a person who journeys with you is more important. Somebody can easily recognize it. I know that I've had friends who will look at me and ask me this question, you're not normal. I won't say it, but they say, you're not normal. You're not the normal self. And I'll turn around and say, yeah, I know. Then they'll ask, what happened? Then I'll start saying something. Then they'll say, okay, we'll pray for you. I said, don't you pray, but then that's not the problem. There's something else. So I know it's important to cultivate those kind of relationships. And the second question was, how do you create a culture? Again, it goes back to the honor and shame culture, and where you pastors and leaders, not only pastors, leaders are expected to show a brave face in front of others. That we have grown with the understanding that if I don't show a strong, macho image of a man or a strong this thing, people will look down on my leadership. This thing. I think we need to, overturn those cultural expectations. Uh, Jesus cried in public. When was the last time I cried in public? I wouldn't. I'll think twice before I cry in public. Jesus opened up his struggles to his three disciples. I'm asking myself, what are my close team? Have I opened up my struggles? Now, the whole question of how can we break away from the cultural expectations of a charismatic, strong leader will be only make an impact and say that a person who is authentic, who is sharing his own journey with God through the struggles, can also make an impact. I think we need to overturn that.
The next one is what to do when believers call mental illness a manifestation of lack of faith.
Yeah, I think I've addressed that well to
Yes.
recognize that all mental illness is not spiritual. We need to recognize, of course, there might be a situation where you are not journeying with God and you're fearful of things. That's a different matter. But then labeling every mental illness is not the way, and the person has to be educated. We see that there is an element of mental struggles which are under the influence of hormones and neurotransmitters and worsened by various aspects of the context and genetics and various other factors.
This already been answered. How can we audit mental health annually? Any question?
Yeah,
Would you
there
like to say more about it?
are. I can share later a couple of questions, Abhijit. Since you have the emails and other things, you can actually share the thing.
Next is, what is the solution or remedy for mental trauma?
And mental trauma itself it's a broad spectrum of this thing. You can have on one end PTSD, the post-traumatic disorder after a major trauma, or a minor this thing. So it depends on which end of the spectrum you are. And if it is at the other end of the spectrum, you need the whole gamut of engagements. You need counseling, you need psychotherapy, you need medications. If you are at this end of the spectrum, you might need only a little bit of listening and encouragement and realigning your perspective. So it is very difficult to kind of give an answer to that. But again, so I'm just leaving it there to say that it all depends on where in the spectrum each person is. Again, I'm not an expert. Maybe others can contribute here. Thank you.
Next is, I think this also has been answered. Would you agree that having an accountability partner with whom you can be honest, not judged, but supported and pray alongside is important?
Definitely, a community or a person or a couple of people journeying is very important in all our journeys. We are not called to journey alone.
If there are any other questions, or if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Well, a lot of pastors they suffer with Parkinson's these days.
Pardon?
We see a lot of pastors suffering with Parkinson's.
Yeah. So I think Parkinson's it's a very common disorder. It is may not be it's not specific to a profession. It's a common disorder in the aging population, and we are seeing more and more. Actually, prevalence seems to be growing up in India. There are multiple factors. One thing they say is that there is increasing, life expectancy is increasing, with which the numbers are going up. Two, there's a general feeling that degenerative disorders have increased in non-communicable diseases have increased in the community in India. People don't know the factors. They think that it may be multifactorial, which includes pollution, various. It's a neurological illness which needs careful management and support, which is yeah.
Are there any more questions or comments anyone would like to say? I have one question, Santhosh, for myself. I mean, you spoke about when during the plague, when the church stepped in, when the professions are unwilling. In today's mental health crisis, where professional care is very expensive and sometimes it's stigmatized as well. How can the local church become the first point of sort of pastoral triage for trauma?
Yeah. So I think it's yeah. So if you look at the large slide, the last couple of slides before the last one, where it's talked about the whole spectrum of care, you have definitely the social, the communities of caring, the speaking the truth into the soul through the word, and this professional system. So if you look at, other than the professional care, which is 1/4 of these the circle, all the three others are in the context of a community of faith, where you know but it depends on how the local church or the community of faith is able to be a have a culture where people can open up, share, or small groups where sharing can happen, interaction can happen. So if you create that culture, then it can become the first uh, uh, point of care. The second, there are community-based models. Lots of community-based models are there, especially in India, where community health workers or volunteers who have been trained to recognize minor mental illness or major illness, minor, and then trained in counseling where they do home-based counseling. In Pune and other places, there are huge secular groups who have done phenomenally well. And even in our Christian community, Christian programs, there are quite a few. So there are community-based models which can be done through volunteers. You don't need to be a trained psychiatrist or psychologist or a counselor to do it. You can actually do community-based assessment, spend time. So both in terms of uh, providing care at the community level by trained volunteers and also creating a community of sharing. Let me give you one example. In Kottayam, where we have just moved in, I find there's something called Pagalvid. It is daycare for elderly. I found that, and I went there for to see how it is done. 30 or 40 elderly, above 80, 70s come together in the context of uh, this community and just share life together. The children are all abroad, you know how Kerala is. And I found, and run by a church, and I found the best model for loneliness. And one of the facilitators told me, Santhosh, if we do it only 1 month, this energy which they get remains for about 3 weeks. And the last week they start struggling. By then the next one comes in. So they have mapped how long the enthusiasm the elderly get through this remains, and say 3 weeks. So he said we realize that once in a month is good enough. But then it's run by a church. So again, a community-based model of addressing the loneliness of the elderly. So it's, there are various ways in which we can explore what can be done in that.
One question is, as mission hospital, what is the solution to this biblically?
I mean, that's what we talked about. Bible has solution to everything. Okay, for all illnesses, not mental illness alone. But Bible also has given us, God also has given us, tools to be used professionally to support people in the journey. So, so how do you look at a solution for a medical problem? Mental health is a medical problem. I'm not talking about spiritual issues. So if it is a medical illness, you use God-given tools, which includes counseling, which includes psychotherapy, includes treatment, and spiritual support, and prayer, and the word to speak into their lives. So it's a comprehensive response.
Someone has just shared a takeaway. Said, thank you for sharing. Looking forward to go through your presentation in more detail to build a community and create a culture of journey together and to reflect on the changes I must make for people to open takeaways from me. Thank you for sharing your takeaway. Anyone would like to share any comments or your learning?
Yeah, that's something somebody has asked one more question, I think there.
Yes.
How
How
can
can pastors and Christian communities balance spiritual care, prayer, and biblical teaching with professional mental health support and trauma-informed practices?
Yeah, so I think the immediate issue which anybody would face is I've got so many things to do. How can you add one more tech tool or technique to my this thing? How do you use that? I think it's important to understand that we don't have to do it everything ourselves. You know, that's the first thing. We need to look at caring for people as a community which cares. Find people who can help in specific areas of this thing. That is the one thought I would like to leave. Second is to rec- to have the knowledge that as you do spiritual care, are there red flags? Are there issues which red flags which point to a situation that this person may be having a mental health issue? How do you equip yourself? I think that is part of our spiritual care role itself, to recognize those red flags which could show you that this person needs more professional care or professional care also. So how do you equip yourself as a pastor to do that? That's the whole question. And that this person may be having trauma from the past or something which happened in the past, why he's behaving the way he's behaving, and then recognize that. So those tools could be part of our own learning and growth. I think all pastors and all leaders should be constantly growing and learning. If mental health is a major issue in the community, we should be growing in the knowledge of this, at least basic information. But use existing resources, others. I'm not saying that all pastors should become counselors, all pastors should be psychologists, all pastors should no, but you know, similarly, can't not all doctors can end up doing counselors. Not, but we need to know where to look for, where to refer, where you can get help from.
So we were looking at about 1.5 hour, and it's exactly 1.5 hour. If there are any other questions or comments, you can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat box.
Thank you so much. Really very informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Okay, then if there are no other comments, I would like to thank Dr. Santhosh for uh, taking us through this session and helping us to remind that church is to be called a community of wholeness. We must move away from body as machines theology and embrace a ministry that recognizes deep emotion and traumatic wounds for our people. And thank you for the new imagination you have shown us. The difference between what care can do for a member who's suffering in silence and finding Christ healing. Thank you so much, Dr. Santhosh, once again for your session and taking us through this. I think it was an emotional journey as well for each one of us. And thank you to all our participants who are here for your presence and your leadership.